In the Middle Kingdom, Egypt, the Egyptian government started an unsustainable military foreign policy that established major fortifications on the far fringes of their empire and the launching of major campaigns in the Levant and Asia Minor. This was done for a multitude of reasons, everything from economic control of trade routes and security against neighboring nations. The question is, though, was this new military policy sustainable for the Egyptian state? The following will define what the Egyptian economy was, why the foreign policy was what it was, and why it became the standard for the Middle Kingdom, and look at the population of the Middle Kingdom and the longer-term effects this policy would have on the Egyptian state and its people, and whether or not it was sustainable. The economy in Pharaonic Egypt was based on grain. Payments for tasks done for the government were paid in food. This grain was first collected by officials in the form of taxes for the use of land to grow the food, as all land was directly owned by either pharaohs or the local temple or nomarch. Once this food was collected by government officials, it was redistributed as payment for work projects and other jobs needed to run the state. This created the backbone of what Egyptian economy was. It was first started in the Old Kingdom, it would continue well through the New Kingdom, to the point even in the New Kingdom, when bartering for goods, quote, each item had a price measured in grain, so that even when grain was not involved in the barter, it was still the currency used in explaining the value of a traded good. Grain comes to serve a twofold purpose in Egyptian life, first for subsistence, and the second for a form of universal currency. From the Middle Kingdom, we start to see a governmental shift in the state's policies and views on foreign conflict. From this era of pharaohs, we start to see that they base their image on the ability to conquer outside threats to the Egyptian state. A great example of this comes from the hymns of worship to one of the most powerful pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, and the man who went full force into these military policies, Senusret III, who has lines of worship that exemplify his authority by showing his military prowess against those people outside of Egypt, quote, whose dread strikes down the tribesmen in their own land, and his majesty's tongue confines Nubia, and his speech scatters the Asiatics. These hymns show that Senusret III put extreme value on his foreign military actions. He did not just stop, however, with the invading and attacking of foreign nations. He also established, quote, huge fortresses, and guards were placed on round-the-clock duty, waiting for any movement. So not only did he build massive military outposts on the far side of the Egyptian border, but staffed these fortifications with large numbers of troops on constant guard from reprisal attacks from the Nubians. With his extreme amount of importance Senusret III put on his military exploits, he effectively created the Middle Kingdom's foreign policy. This was due to the fact that most of all the pharaohs had a cultural tendency to try to outdo the achievements of the past rulers, to show that they also had power and authority to rule. So by using these exploits as an example of his power, it effectively meant that all pharaohs that followed had to do the same thing, creating the foreign policy of the Middle Kingdom. To calculate the cost of building and maintaining these vast military outposts, and thus to look and see if they were sustainable military policies, we need to understand how much of the economy was needed for the upkeep of these outposts, and the food needed for the sustainment of the population of Egypt as a whole, as well as the possible production output of Egypt, to see the impact these policies would have had on the Egyptian population. From translations from both New Kingdom and Middle Kingdom sources, R.L. Miller was able to build a workable model of the population of ancient Egypt during Pharaonic times. Miller concluded, after utilizing mathematical equations and adjustments based on famine and pest, that 2.6 million could have been supported by the 6 million ora under cultivation in Pharaonic times. This estimation was based on food production, accounting, and ration breakdown equations used by the Egyptians for the distribution of food for workers and soldiers away from cities. This model is perfect for looking at Egypt before the militarized foreign policies, because it shows what peacetime Egyptian population would have looked like. So based off this model, we know that Egypt could sustainably create enough grain to feed around 2.6 million people, quote, with a potential labor force of 20,000 adult males, free to be used as full-time labor. This is an important factor for our problem. Your military can't suddenly return home to harvest the fields if you are off campaigning or stationing them on border duty. So this means that the military would have had to have been made up of these 20,000 free laborers. However, these laborers are also needed for the general maintenance of the state as well, for things such as irrigation projects, maintenance of government buildings. In other words, to keep a large force away from Egyptian cities, you would have to then start pulling farmers for the upkeep of the civil works needed for the state. The problem in this also lies in the fact that when you permanently remove a large number of workers from the labor pool, yet still have to support them for a long duration of time, production starts to go down. Fewer workers means less farmland that can be worked, which means less grain in the economy, which means more people start to starve, which means the system becomes unsustainable over a long duration of time, which is exactly what happened. The militarized foreign policy adopted by the Middle Kingdom ended up creating an unsustainable agricultural and economic imbalance that leads to the downfall of the central government due to large-scale removal of too much of the workforce needed to create the food supply to sustain the population of Egypt.